Hey everyone, welcome back to the Collector's Compass, the official podcast of Collectors MD. I'm your host, Alyx founder of Collectors MD, and today's guest brings a voice that feels not just relevant, but necessary. Saul Malek is one of America's emerging voices at the forefront of gambling awareness and prevention landscape. He's a keynote speaker, recovering gambling addict, and educator who's been featured on outlets like the New York Times, PBS NewsHour, NPR, and more. His story and his work focus on educating young people and communities about how modern gambling has evolved and how easily it pulls people into cycles that feel impossible to escape. What makes this conversation so important is the overlap. The same dopamine loops driving sports betting, online casinos, and DFS are now deeply embedded into modern collecting through things like card breaks, live auctions, sudden death bidding, and endless chase mechanics. Today, we're talking about Saul's journey, the modern gambling epidemic, the psychological parallels between gambling and collecting, and what it really means to bring awareness into a space that refuses to acknowledge it has a problem. Saul, I'm genuinely grateful you're here, man. Welcome to the Collector's Compass.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an amazing thing you're doing because gambling itself is already so niche, and then to add collecting that people, I don't think you'd think of it until you bring it to the forefront.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is an epidemic, and it's starting to get to a point where it's spiraling out of control, and there aren't enough voices that are out there speaking about, the nuances, the emotional burnout, the financial tolls this is taking on young people who have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And so what you're doing is incredible, and I'm really excited to dive in. So with that, we're going to start with our first segment, which is your story. We're calling it From Fantasy to Fallout. So I think your story is extremely powerful because it's painfully relatable, right? You didn't grow up intending to become, addicted to gambling. You were into fantasy sports, competition, connection, data, things that look totally normal on the surface and other young adults are into. And then something shifted, right? We've talked about this. We've unpacked a lot of it off camera. And I'd love for you to walk our audience through that evolution from fun to fixation and from excitement to compulsion.
It's interesting, Alex, when I look back. So, I started fantasy baseball back in middle school. So I was 10 or 11 years old. And I think back to how it started, where actually my mom's very first question surrounding my participation in it was, is this gambling? And it was a $20 buy-in season-long fantasy baseball league. And I said, no, it wasn't gambling. And to think to those early days, I can even see some of the tendencies I had in my sports betting present in my fantasy baseball escapades. I was a constant checker. So I was checking random, games for teams I didn't care about because my guy was on these teams. And, it was almost like the same anticipation with sports betting of seeing, because like on the MLB interface, you would see yellow if your guy was on deck, or, green if your player was batting. So I would constantly look at the, colors and the batters and all that. But it was overall still fun, which was your point is it started fairly innocently looking, because even though it took up so much time and it took up so much involvement, it was social. We had a fantasy baseball group chat. I did like reading the statistics of the players, and I even would write articles about fantasy baseball with my friends. So overall, it was a positive experience. I would say that the transition to the fixation piece, like with the sports betting, was simply because the action was quicker. With the fantasy baseball league, sure, there are games every day, but it's like, you have a full season with essentially the same lineup, barring a few trades. And it's more of a slow grind than me betting on a basketball game. And so when I got into sports betting my sophomore year of college in 2017, I would say it also changed because there was an immediate gratification. like having an immediate win and seeing tangible currency showing up on Venmo on my phone was an instant affirmation that I was successful, that I could be a big shot, that this could actually become a source of income, could take the place of a career. And so I think when you combine those elements, Alyx, that's how it allowed itself to become a fixation, because it took all that I liked about fantasy baseball and just exploded it into an immediate quick hit that provided instant income, instant gratification, and the next bet was just around the corner. You didn't have to sleep on the next day's games or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can totally relate to that because I transitioned myself from the traditional sports betting, waiting, for a game to end to be paid out, win or lose, and quickly transitioned over to live blackjack because, to your point, I needed that quick fix, that quick adrenaline spike. And so I'd sit at multiple seats at a blackjack table, live blackjack table. So it was all, from my phone, and would just play hand after hand. And it was like dopamine spike after dopamine spike. And the ups, the downs, the emotional pull just completely took over. Right.
Sure.
And I think with fantasy sports, usually it doesn't start in a dangerous place. Like you were saying, for most people, it begins as something that's genuinely fun. It's a way to stay connected to the games, compete with friends,
Sure.
Maybe talk some trash in group chats, and feel more invested when you're watching the game. It just adds another layer of excitement to something we all love. And it feels strategic. It really feels harmless and even wholesome. But somewhere along that line, the fun starts to shift, right? What once was about the camaraderie and the friendly competition, that all can slowly morph into things like daily fantasy contests and constant lineup tinkering and the urge to always have money on something. And the focus moves from enjoyment to outcome, from community to control, from this is fun to I need to win this back. Right. And that's where it starts to get dangerous. The games stop feeling like games. They start to feel like pressure, like stress, like something that, is determining your mood, your self-worth, your ability to relax. And the dopamine spikes just become sharper. The losses sting harder. The chase gets louder. And the scariest part is that it often happens so gradually that people don't even realize that they've crossed the line until they're just already too deep into it. And so fantasy sports isn't inherently bad, but just like anything else, when competition turns into compulsion and entertainment just turns into emotional dependency, that's when the fun quietly disappears and the risk takes over.
I think it's, an amazing point of how innocuous it seems even in the moment. And that's the trickiest thing that I talk about, and even a lot of the students I hear from talk about, is at what point did it become harmful? At what point was this no longer a dream world that I looked forward to? Because the whole progression for me, I'm not sure, possibly for you as well, seemed like just natural next steps. So I look back on it now and say, well, gosh, why would I bet more than I could afford to bet on a game I knew nothing about? But in the moment, it seems like, oh, I win 20. Why wouldn't I bet 100? And then if I enjoy the feeling of this, why wouldn't I do that? And then I don't want to be down 100. So of course I'm going to try to get it back. And all of it seems very logical in the moment.
Right. Yeah. The progression usually doesn't look that dramatic. There isn't like some big moment where a light switch flips and you just say like, okay, now this is unhealthy. I need to walk away. Right. Quite often it's a lot quieter than that. And that's what makes it even more dangerous. At first, anything tied to wagering or chasing dopamine feels like excitement, right? It's novelty, it's stimulation, you're paying for entertainment is how a lot of people justify it. You're riding the rush, the anticipation, the possibility, the thrill of the near win. And whether it's fantasy sports, traditional gambling, card breaks, pack ripping, auctions, even compulsive spending, right? It all ties into this same cycle. Right. It can move slowly, but the motivation might end up shifting. and you stop playing or participating for enjoyment and start playing to regulate how you feel. And you're not just doing it because it's fun anymore. You're doing it because maybe you're bored or you're anxious. Maybe you're feeling restless or lonely or overwhelmed or stressed, right? There's a lot of these different moods and emotions that we experience that drive the behavior. And that behavior becomes less about the activity itself and just more about relief, about escape, about shifting your current emotional state. And that's usually the turning point, right? When the primary question changes from, do I want to do this? Am I actually doing it for fun? To, why do I feel like I need to do this, right? And that's when fun starts to morph into compulsion. You start rationalizing things. You start chasing your losses. You're increasing the frequency or the volume of bets and how often you're doing it, right? You're raising the stakes because a $50 bet just doesn't do it for you anymore, or just traditional fantasy sports doesn't scratch that itch. And you're saying things like, just one more, I'll stop after this, or I can make it all back. And the dopamine hit doesn't feel like a reward anymore. It feels like a requirement just to feel okay, just to feel normal, which is exactly what we see with things like alcohol and substance abuse, right? Addicts end up having to like drink or do the drug in order to feel a sense of normalcy. They're no longer chasing the high that they once experienced early on. And so with collecting and with gambling, what once energized you now controls you. Then you realize like the line has been crossed. And it doesn't just happen all at once. It happens through repetition, through tolerance, through the brain's rewiring itself to crave the intensity instead of the contentment. And suddenly, like, the activity isn't enhancing your life, it's hijacking it, right? So again, whether it's gambling, fantasy sports, card breaks, or any other high stimulation cycle, the real danger begins when pleasure turns into pressure and choice turns into urgency, because that's when it stops being entertainment and starts becoming survival in disguise, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about your personal experience. I know you've shared on your website, or maybe I saw it in one of your podcasts that you were on, driving to the Lucky Eagle Casino, and that being like your moment where you told yourself, this is, the one that fixes everything, only to leave feeling broken again. So looking back on that now, what do you wish someone had said to you before you reached that point?
I hesitate to say that people were entirely oblivious along the way. I want to say, in my recollection, my parents they were the ones who actually pretty much pushed me to go to Gamblers Anonymous before that happened. I mean, right when I was starting my junior year of college is when I first went to a GA meeting. So I believe there were people around me who, excuse me, people around me who had noticed that my behavior was becoming problematic. And I guess what I wish someone had said, maybe, I don't know if I would have changed, but I think maybe it would have been good for people to cut me off earlier, to say, we're done with you completely unless you really show you're getting help. I believe that there's such a difficult place between supporting and loving someone and then keeping them enabled, where they feel that no matter what they do, they'll always be loved. And I think that to an extent, like, a parent will always love their child, but to be able to step away, I can't imagine, but perhaps that would have been more of a kick in the pants to see, well, not only do people not trust me, but they're just done with me. They're over me. Everyone's moved on. And that, I think, would possibly have increased the urgency. And I think that's more effective than anyone saying, like, oh, just stop, or things like that. So,
Yeah.
Going to that casino, I just remember thinking when I did that, because I had some cash after actually having a winning week with a bookie that paid me cash. I just convinced myself, well, if I just go in person, and I didn't even know that this casino, because it was in Texas, it didn't have all the full gaming experience. There wasn't roulette or blackjack or anything. It was just like virtual machines like slot
Right.
machines. And so I thought by going there, I didn't know that that's all they had. I thought I'd be able to play roulette and I could just visualize myself, oh, if I win this and then I do this and I do this. And, just telling myself that it'll be amazing. They'll pay me out in cash. I'll feel great. I'll pay it all back. And what's crazy about that sort of like a 2.5 hour drive is there's nothing saying turn around, go back. It's almost like being a zombie. And I've seen these videos, Chris Hansen to Catch a Predator, and it seems like the exact same thing. He says, hey, you drove 3 hours here to commit a crime and meet a minor, and it's like you didn't think once about turning around. Like, just this compulsion driving the behavior.
Yeah, there's two things that you just brought up that I think are really, really important to sort of unpack. And the first one is the people that we affect, our loved ones, right? And it often gets missed in this progression, things like the quiet heartbreak happening around the person struggling, right? It's the parents who can see their child changing and feel powerless to stop it, or the spouse who feels distance start to creep in and doesn't understand why the person they love feels more connected to the next wager, the next bet than to them, right? Or the family trying to help without pushing too hard or saying the wrong thing, right? These situations can be really, really delicate. And the pain doesn't come from judgment, it comes from love. Loved ones don't just witness the behavior, they feel the emotional fallout. Things like the secrecy, the stress, the unpredictability, everything. Addiction doesn't just affect the individual who is losing the money or is feeling depressed or stressed. It disrupts the entire emotional ecosystem around them. And that's why this isn't about recovery for one person. It's about healing relationships, rebuilding trust, restoring the connection that this compulsive behavior slowly erodes, right? Because behind every addictive cycle is just somebody trying to cope, and behind them is usually a family or a spouse or even friends or coworkers that just don't want to see them lose and suffer and feel this immense, amount of pain. And then the other piece that I think is really important is there's this dangerous moment where we stop seeing the behavior clearly and start convincing ourselves we've mastered it, like we're some sort of expert, right? We tell ourselves we're different, we're smarter, we're more disciplined, we can figure it out this time, we've cracked the code, we've studied the stats, the trends, the patterns, like we're expert blackjack players or roulette players. And somewhere along the way, that turns into this illusion of control. We don't walk away because we're certain the next move will be the right one, or at least that's what we tell ourselves, right? And we also feel this sense that we want to prove that we're not like everyone else, right? And that's when, again, the shift starts to happen. Instead of making these conscious choices, like turning the car around and going back home, we start moving on autopilot, right? Clicking, chasing, rationalizing, promising just one more while ignoring how exhausted and disconnected and hollow all of this is making us feel. And we're no longer living in the present or in the moment. We're operating on things like impulse, driven by dopamine and denial. And we slowly become these zombies, like you called it, to the chase. And it's not because we're reckless by nature, but it's because the illusion that we've created in front of us tells us we're in control right up until we're not. And so that's why I think so many of these stories overlap, and we hear so much of the same within meetings at GA or even in our weekly peer support meetings at Collectors MD. So many people have run into the same internal issues of convincing themselves that they're pros, that they've figured out the system and they can make it all back on the next swing or the next wager. But like at the end of the day, there's a reason why they say the house always wins, right?
Yeah, I think the thing I tell people is when they say, oh, it's just because you can't win. Say, no, it's not that I couldn't have a big win. It's that I couldn't stop. It's the stopping that's the problem.
Right.
And I'm sure Rob, One Day at a Time. Rob, he put up this video. Yeah, he put up this video the other day that I thought was interesting about, well, would you have it was something along the lines of stopping if you had won, if you kept winning. And he alluded to a point, and I don't want to misquote him, but the gist I got from it was, even the winning is destructive in a way. If you're addicted, just staying. I mean, and there's no hypothetical world where I would have come out ahead in the way I was gambling, but say I could have, it would have, I believe, destroyed all these relationships and things, because it would have taken up my whole time, energy, hiding, all that. Even win or lose, it's just the behavior itself.
Yeah.
Really.
We always say winning, especially early on, like beginner's luck,
it's bad. It's worst.
It's the devil in disguise, right? Because it gives you this false sense of hope that, this is the norm. And you get that initial dopamine spike that feels so incredible that you just want to recreate it. We see this happen all the time in the hobby with things like ripping personal boxes or joining breaks, where your first time out, you end up hitting a card that you could never even fathom hitting, right? Your dream card, and you are able to flip it for 10 grand. Let's say you got into a break for a couple $100 and you turned it into 10 grand. And suddenly you're like, screw gambling, screw day trading, screw, any other type of investment opportunity. This is incredible. Plus it's like tied to sports, and the cards look cool, and there's camaraderie and community. Like, this is amazing. And then suddenly you find yourself just going down this rabbit hole, joining more breaks, buying more boxes. And next thing you know, you've spent as much money as you sold the card for, with like getting nothing in return. It's not like gambling where like you win, lose. You're playing blackjack hands, and you win some, you lose some, and usually you walk away down a little or up a little. Like with the hobby, with card collecting, it's so hard to hit a big card. It's such an anomaly that people don't realize that you literally have like a 5% chance on getting your initial investment back if you're just focused on the financial component, as opposed to what they think is like a 50-50 odds of doubling their money. It's an illusion. It doesn't exist. So I'm glad Rob put a video out like that. I know he creates a lot of content around that. I was on Rob's podcast. He was on mine. And as a matter of fact, I mentioned the partnerships before we hopped on our live, and he just posted, to show you real quick this.
Oh, that was quick. Wow. Let me see that.
He added Collectors MD to his resources, which is pretty cool.
Oh, there it is. Hey, yeah. Awesome.
So we're doing great things with Rob and One Day at a Time Gambling Awareness, just to sort of point our communities in each other's direction, because again, there's just so much overlap between traditional gambling and collecting addiction, not just with the cards, but with the gacha games and NFTs and sneakers, watches, handbags. Like there's just so many different verticals now that pull people's emotional heartstrings and suck them into these dopamine cycles. And we need to spread more awareness around that, because we are finding so many people self-excluding from gambling, saying, oh yeah, I haven't gambled in however long, but behind the scenes, they're still joining breaks. They're still
in action.
They're still in action. And they don't even realize it, because it's disguised as this childhood hobby rooted in nostalgia. And they can't like wrap their heads around how something like that could register or be considered as gambling, which is what it is. We have to call a spade a spade. So we'll get into a little bit more of that in a bit here. I want to keep us on track. So with that, we're going to transition over to our next segment, which is the modern gambling landscape. So one of the things you talk about often is how gambling doesn't look like gambling used to anymore, right? It's no longer just Vegas or Atlantic City or, shady back rooms. It's in your pocket. It's on every sporting broadcast. It's normalized, and it's even celebrated, right? And so how dangerous has that shift been, especially for impressionable young adults?
I would say, this is what I say. I say gambling has been Halloweenified over the last few years, meaning if you were to show up to work in a Spider-Man costume today, you would look very weird. You would stand out. But if you were to go to work on Halloween dressed in that costume, you'd fit in if you're doing the costume party. And I say gambling back in, even when I was gambling 2018, I stood out like Spider-Man on November 20th. Like I stood out because I was kind of the only one doing it. But now it's like every day's Halloween. Every day, everyone's in costume. Everyone's doing it. So I think it's a lot harder to see the harm for what it is when your whole friend group's doing it, when everyone around you is doing it. And so that's one of the primary problems I see is with how popular and acceptable it is that the harm is harder to recognize because of how commonplace it is. The landscape has shifted since I was in action. A big part of what I see as a shift is how social media has changed regarding gambling. And, so many pages, of course, even the popular sports broadcasting networks are posting tickets from crazy parlays and things like that, where they're promoting, of course, the worst odds statistically and getting especially young men interested in placing like crazy parlays. And so I guess not much older than I am. So did you grow up on the GameCube on like NFL Street and stuff like that?
Yeah. I didn't have GameCube, but it was, PlayStation, Xbox,
Oh, yeah.
NFL Street, NBA Street. I'm 36, so I grew up
Okay.
in the 90s, early
Yeah.
2000s, and absolutely, yeah, that was definitely rooted in my childhood.
Oh, well, good to know, because that's what I think of when I think of even like sports video games. I think I have NFL Street from 2003, and it's a certain roster when you buy the game of players, and you go play that same game today. It's the same guys from 22 years ago that are in the
Right.
rosters.
Right.
And it's not like 2K hasn't been coming out with new games every year. That's not really my entire point. My point is now, of course, you have to buy the new game every year, but also when you buy the game, then it's like you have guys spending all this money to open up packs of cards of like, oh, I'm going to get this rare player. I'm going to pack a legend. I'm going to open up this. I'm going to, spend money to in-app purchase whatever the coolest item or the next best thing is. And it wasn't like that growing up. I'm starting to kind of date myself, but we didn't have any things like that. We certainly didn't have guys going in on cryptocurrencies or playing the stock market the way that it's really gamified today as well. So I guess I'm taking a more broad lens and answering this prompt right now to just say it's not just sports betting. It's like, look at all these things. And of course, in your domain, talking about card breaks, shoes, things like that, auctions. And I'm sure maybe you've seen the Costco guys who are pretty big on social media. It's like they have this kid, Big Justice, or AJ, Big Justice, I guess is his name. And he is promoting opening up rare cards. And this kid's like maybe 12 years old, and he's like selling card breaks and gambling to his followers. So it's across all domains, really.
Yep. We constantly repost those videos that Arena Club post of AJ and Big Justice promoting those repacks. And here, I'll show you an example. And it's more or less the same thing every single time.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like they're doing the exact same thing. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, a couple months ago, they were even going to the extent of showing like a graphic of the comp of the card and how much the kid, Big Justice, was up or down, right? And I had commented from the Collectors MD account on Instagram that we shouldn't be focused on the profit, especially for these children. We need to be focused on purpose and meaning and the purity and joy of collecting, like how it used to be, how it should be. And they actually started to remove that, or they no longer post the comps or the prices. And I'm 90% certain that it's a direct result of me commenting and other people also responding and acknowledging and agreeing with what I was saying. But still, even this, it's just not acceptable. I mean, you could see here, I found this the day after they posted it, but I commented right here, promoting gambling style products and mechanics towards the youth is simply not okay. We have to do better, not just for ourselves, but for the next generation of incredibly impressionable children. Right. And for those watching who aren't familiar with what Arena Club is or what a repack is, basically you could see here, Big Justice, this young 12-year-old innocent kid is opening mystery packs of cards that, cost upwards of a couple $100, some of them even more. And basically getting all hyped up because, oh, this Jamar Chase is worth X amount. And so, wow, we made back 50% of how much we spent, or we, won on this pack. I mean, we're talking about just straight up gambling mechanics. And this is a huge component of the hobby now, these repacks and repack culture. And Arena Club is not the only one doing it. They're just doing it in a more structured way with the website and a whole tiered membership system and different types of packs and marketing. And Derek Jeter is involved, which breaks my heart because Derek Jeter is one of my favorite athletes of all time, as a lifelong Yankee fan. And I still love him. He's only involved to an extent. And folks like him and Tom Brady and other athletes that get behind this sort of activity and behavior, I kind of go back and forth with it, right? Because is it their responsibility as athletes to understand all of the nuances and the insidious nature that comes with gambling like mechanics, right? To them, it's like they're just involved in some sort of hobby product or some sort of sports card entertainment activity, and they're not fully understanding the dynamic and the impact that it's having on children and young adults. And so I think it's really more so the platforms and the manufacturers and the companies that are actually selling the cards. It's their duty to provide things like disclaimers and warning signs and guardrails and regulation and oversight. All these things don't currently exist in any capacity in the hobby. And that is a huge part of what we're doing with Collectors MD, is pushing advocacy for reform and real change in this space, similar to sort of how the gambling industry and landscape looks now, with the Gaming Commission and self-exclusion tools, and even apps providing their own cool-offs and deposit limits and things like that. None of that exists in any capacity in the hobby right now, and that's what we're working towards changing. And so we're actively partnering with card shops, breakers, platforms to promote responsible ripping and collecting. And so you'll start to see that roll out more and more if you are immersed in the hobby. I'm sure you'll see it when we post about it. But these are all things that we need to spread awareness on. We need to educate the masses on. It's not Derek Jeter or Tom Brady's responsibility to do that. It's up to, again, the powers that be, the ones at the helm that are profiting from a lot of this behavior and activity, to provide their customers with a sense of support. It's something that we talk about at great length and really deserves the maximum amount of attention, especially because it affects kids and young adults. But I want to make sure that we keep moving here. So something I really respect about your message, Saul, is that you're not anti-gambling per se, similar to how we're not anti-collecting. You're more so pro-education. Why is that distinction so important?
I think the primary purpose of why that's important is because it's the most practical and realistic approach. And I believe, being the totally anti-gambling zealot, is not doing a service to what's out there. I'm sure there are people who are anti-gambling for religious purposes or whatever their reason is, and that's acceptable. It's fine. I don't mind what someone else believes, but I just look at what's out there, and especially being kind of in the trenches, so to speak, with a lot of young adults talking about this, is that many of them are not looking to completely abandon the activity. It's like, how do I get to play? How can I play poker with my friends once a week and make sure it's just another social activity, the way we would go bowling or something? And I think for that reason, it's important to meet people where they are, because if I go in and tell them, oh, just don't do it at all, stop doing it, then they're like, yeah, screw it. Who's this guy, right? This guy telling me what to do, versus working with them, being approachable and saying, I'm not against the behavior. I think it's really just best that you're equipped with the knowledge to make your own choices. And as someone who's in recovery, I think the most attractive thing to me about being in GA was that my sponsor framing things as suggestion rather than you have to do this or have to do that. And I think it really goes along the same lines there.
Yeah, really well said. And that's exactly where our worlds sort of collide, right? This is where what we call intentional collecting becomes our form of harm reduction, right? Because not everybody is just ready or even able to just walk away overnight, and telling somebody to just stop altogether without understanding where they're at emotionally, financially, or psychologically can actually push them deeper into
Sure.
shame and secrecy, right? And so
Totally.
intentional collecting is about meeting people where they are, like you just said, not where we think they should be. For some, that might mean slowing down instead of spiraling. For others, it might look like setting boundaries instead of just chasing every single drop or every single release. And for some, it's learning how to pause, reflect, and ask, why am I doing this right now? So we're not here to strip people of something that they love, especially something that, again, is rooted in childhood and nostalgia and memories and connection. We're here to help them rebuild a relationship that feels safer, more grounded, and more conscious. So harm reduction says, let's reduce the damage while we increase awareness. Let's create space for self-compassion while people figure out their next step. Let's support progress, not perfection. Because when someone feels seen instead of being judged, and supported instead of forced, or informed instead of shamed, real change becomes a lot more possible and realistic, like you said.
Right. Being realistic.
It
Absolutely.
becomes sustainable. So
Sure.
intentional collecting and harm reduction isn't just a philosophy, it's a bridge. And it's a bridge between chaos and clarity, compulsion and choice, and surviving the hobby or whatever your vice is, and actually enjoying it again on your own terms. Now, with that all being said, I always have to add the disclaimer that if you do not feel like you have a healthy relationship with collecting, gambling, any sort of vice that is socially acceptable, or not socially acceptable for that matter, then we highly recommend considering all options, and some of those options might include complete abstinence. So with that, Collectors MD is split into two lanes. One for our intentional collectors who still want to engage in the hobby, but do so in a more healthy and sustainable way. And then those that just can't have a healthy relationship with collecting at all and need to abstain completely. And like you said, Saul, we respect both of those paths equally, and we meet our community members wherever they are in their journey.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say on that I think is important is I've been to GA meetings where someone comes in and they're like, lonely, I have no girlfriend, I have no this, I have that, and like to be able to kind of just tell them, well, just stop, versus teaching them skills to cope. Because I think if you have someone who has no coping skills, nothing going for them, just stopping their life actually may seem like it's getting worse because they have no crutch to fall back on, versus naturally, if you get someone to adopt a different, healthier lifestyle, then I believe naturally, then they just don't see the need to go back into that behavior.
Yeah, really well said.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, we're going to transition over to our next segment, which is where gambling and collecting converge, which we've already kind of touched on a bit, but I want to unpack it a little bit more. So when you look at the modern card breaking ecosystem, platforms like Whatnot, Fanatics Live, and Breakers screaming like bid, 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 the overlays, the flashing graphics, what feels familiar to you from a gambling lens?
I think, well, the unknown for sure. It's the anticipation, the unknown, and the dream world that's being built up prior to what you're opening. And I do have to preface by saying I don't want to speak out of my depth and pretend like I'm using these platforms so that I can describe their interface maybe as clearly as someone else might. But I feel confident in saying I at least have a rudimentary knowledge of what it looks like, kind of the mechanics of it. And I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine in GA the other day who was talking about Whatnot and how he had maybe done a few of these, bought a few cards, or was bidding on a few things, and then realized, hey, wait a minute, this isn't healthy for me. This feels the same way that sports betting did, and he had to step away from it, or he chose to step away from it.
Right.
But I'm someone who grew up collecting sports cards and things, and even there, I remember the ecstasy that came with going to Toys R Us or wherever with my dad and getting to browse the aisle. And I mean, this is probably 10 steps removed behind from what the current interface looks like. But I think probably the same feelings of like, oh, I'm going to open this, and this is what we're doing Saturday morning on the weekend. And
Right.
there's so much that came with it that I equate to like the same environment, the whole ritual, the whole routine of sports betting, of like, this is going to be the whole part of my day that I look forward to. And the whole anticipation and the rush and the feeling of safety and comfort and all that. So I could imagine that you're getting those same feelings from these other platforms. And I used to also see, did you ever see those ads of like Quibbit or something where you can buy these bids and like win a TV for $8, but you're just constantly buying these bids and, things like that.
Right.
So.
Yeah. It exists in so many different realms and subcultures and communities. And yeah, I mean, when you watch these live breaks, it's not just people buying cards anymore. It's a fully engineered stimulation loop. I mentioned the flashing graphics. There's the countdown timers, the chat flying, the breaker hyping every pull and yelling, like I said before, bid, just creating this sense of unnecessary but relentless urgency for their customers to participate. It's all the same psychological architecture you see in casinos and online sports books, right? It's variable reinforcement. You don't know when the hit is coming, so your brain stays locked in, like you said, the unknown. And every time someone pulls a big card, it creates this illusion that you could be next. That's the near miss effect, right? That's the chase.
Sure.
That's the hook. What really mirrors gambling, for me is the speed of it all. There's no time to react. There's no time to reflect or pause. There's no space for logic. It's designed to keep you in this emotional part of the brain instead of the rational part. It's all just engineered around impulse, right? Your heart rate goes up, your decision making narrows, and suddenly you're clicking the bid button before you even start to ask yourself if any of this makes sense, right? And the scariest part is most people don't even realize this is happening. They just think they're getting caught up in the excitement of the hobby.
Sure.
But neurologically, the same reward pathways are firing off, the same dopamine spikes, the same crash afterwards, the same guilt and shame when it doesn't go your way. So when I look at these platforms like Fanatics Live and whatnot, I don't just see entertainment. I see a system that's been optimized to keep people chasing even when it's hurting them. And that's where awareness becomes everything, because once you can see the mechanism, you're no longer just trapped inside.
Yeah, I think, what I see in your description too, that parallels how I see how sports betting has also evolved is the community aspect, is the social aspect. Like in my very bare bones example, my dad go to the store and I open up a pack of sports cards. It's like, okay, that kind of exists in isolation and so whatever. But if you have a whole community, if you're in a Discord, you're in a chat, you're watching a live stream, there's such a community component of it. The same way I see, these guys who post their picks online with sports betting and, join his Discord and do this. It's like adding to the whole smoke and mirror show of the whole thing.
Yeah, community is really, really important to a lot of people. And, I think one of the reasons why so many people don't walk away from some of these activities like gambling or the hobby, or even just take a step back, isn't just because of the money. It's the fear of losing that connection, right? The group text, the rituals, the inside jokes, the sense of being part of something, especially now that online engagement has become the center of a lot of people's social worlds, right? For
Sure.
many, gambling becomes tied to things like identity and belonging and not just behavior. But what people don't realize is that stepping away from harm doesn't mean stepping into isolation. It means shifting the lens. And so organizations and support groups like Collectors MD, that same sense of camaraderie can still exist and does still exist. Even though like the late night conversations, the shared stories, the understanding, but like through a responsible, grounded, recovery informed framework, right? You're not losing community. You're entering into one that prioritizes your well-being instead of feeding your struggle. So it's still connection. It's still support. It's still shared experience. The difference is that here, the bond isn't just built around the chaos of the chase. It's built around honesty, healing and intentional growth. And for many people, that's the most powerful realization, that you're not giving something up. You're just finally joining something that has your back. And that's so important. So community still exists. You just have to find a more healthy way to engage with it.
Yeah, I mean, and I found that too with even being in GA, and it's taken some adjustment, but I do believe that, getting over that hurdle is important, because otherwise, you're right, it thrives in isolation. The illness does.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about that sort of gray area. And, again, what's scary is that many people don't see a lot of what we just talked about as gambling. They just see it as a hobby. But again, like we just outlined in great detail, the behavior patterns, the secrecy, the escalation, the guilt, the financial harm, all of that mirror addiction perfectly. So from your perspective, how dangerous is that gray area?
Oh man, it's the most dangerous. I mean, it's incredibly dangerous to be in the unknown ether of a hobby, an enjoyment versus a compulsion. I think that it's a difficult topic for me because I'm naturally an impulsive person, ADHD tendency. I mean, I've been diagnosed with that sort of thing. And to be, especially on the younger side, and to have been reinforced for a while that what you're doing is social, is healthy, can make money, is kind of the key to happiness. To have that all morph so subtly, I think that's what's so dangerous about it, is that no one holds up a sign that says, "Oh, now here you're now turning right into addiction," or something. It's like, I know I'm just along the path, and maybe it was a speed bump that I thought was just temporary, but it actually took me down into an unwanted neighborhood or something, and I just had no idea. And so,
Yeah.
students ask that a lot, of like, well, right now it's fine, it's only poker on Friday, but how will I know? How will I know it's a problem? And so I try to provide guidance on, well, here's some signs of increasing the amount you're paying. If you stay too long, things like that, you're betting on things you don't really care about. But it's dangerous too, because some of that can also appear to be successful. Like if I bet on a random first half NBA game and I hit that, then it tells me like, this isn't destructive. This isn't dangerous. This is just me being the big shot that I am. And so, I wish I had a more concrete answer, Alyx, other than saying it's so dangerous because it's so hard to describe and experience it.
Right. Yeah, really well said. It is such a gray area, and it's not like there's a distinct level of excitement or dopamine or anxiety or depression that can quantify somebody as having a disease of addiction, right? There's
Right.
no way to
There's some
sort of
measurement.
diagnose it. There's no
Never.
measurement.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like, for instance, I walked into a local card shop yesterday. This is a card shop that we're looking to build out our responsible messaging campaign with, one of the first early adapters. And I was speaking with the manager there, who I've grown a really great, relationship with, friendship even, over the last year or so. And he has been super supportive. He's been joining my meetings from time to time, and he's been plugging Collectors MD, and he agreed to post our flyer in their shop and all these things. And he's a really great dude. And we were chatting yesterday just about the direction of Collectors MD and like everything that has been going on lately. And he brought up the fact that he recently placed a bet that was sort of outside of the normal amount he typically wagers. He gambles, responsibly. He does it for entertainment, and he's able to, do it here and there and not get sucked in. And so he said he bet, I don't know, a couple $100, which is, again, a little bit more than what he normally bets. And it was on like a multi-leg parlay that ended up paying out like $3,000. Right. And when the parlay ended up hitting for him on the last leg, he said he immediately felt this sense of guilt, and he thought of me, and he thought of Collectors MD, because he realized in that moment, like we were talking about earlier, that win could potentially fuel and catapult him into more behavior like that. He now has $3,000 of money he won that he could end up playing or wagering, and things can start to slip. And so, he's been practicing mindfulness and intentional collecting and even gambling. And he's just trying to be more thoughtful with a lot of his purchasing decisions and how he spends his money on things like entertainment. And so he kind of caught himself in that moment, and he realized, like, I need a pause here. I need to make sure that I'm taking my personal inventory and I'm not spiraling. And I just found that to be so powerful, because it goes to show that you don't have to be an addict in order to participate in a movement like this. You don't have to be a member of Gamblers Anonymous or in some sort of outpatient facility to be practicing the 12 steps of the GA Yellow Book. Right?
Oh, wow. There it is.
Like you could absolutely focus on your own version of harm reduction or intentional collecting without having to acknowledge or admit that you have some sort of problem or disease. And so I think that's really, really important for people. Again, spreading awareness, making sure that people know that they can participate in these activities as long as they're doing it with responsibility, accountability, and integrity. That's exactly what we're trying to push within the hobby space, within these collecting verticals, because again, that gray area, that crossover just has completely blurred the lines, and nobody has stepped up and said, we need to layer in some responsible messaging similar to what already exists in the gambling industry. It's part of the corporate responsibility of a lot of these companies to do that. But because there's no gaming commission or SEC overlooking everything with regulation and oversight, they don't feel the need. They feel like it might jeopardize revenue, and they just don't want to open up Pandora's box, or, again, call it for what it is. So it's an ongoing challenge and struggle we are facing every single day, but we know it's an uphill battle. And the more people we can get on board and the wider audiences we can reach, the better it is for everybody. We will be able to grow the hobby in a healthy and sustainable direction for the foreseeable future. And that's what we ultimately want for everybody. We don't want to cancel the fun. We don't want to cancel collecting culture. We just want people to understand and acknowledge that they can participate in these activities, but they should be practicing responsibly. That's all it is. So with that, we see people show up to our peer support meetings who look like they got hit by a train and didn't see it coming, right? These are people, on the sort of other side of the spectrum from what we just talked about. They don't have any guardrails in place. Maybe they haven't seen or acknowledged any of the warning signs within traditional gambling. I'm curious, from your perspective, when somebody is sort of in between and they didn't realize that they had a gambling problem but until it was too late, or until they got hit by that train or that late night tilt session, what sort of advice or recommendation would you give to those people?
Sorry, I was just making sure I clarified. You said to the people that look like they've been destroyed by it?
Yeah, they look like they've been destroyed. They're showing up to a peer support meeting, whether it be Gamblers Anonymous or Collectors MD, for the very first time. They had no idea that they had a problem until they got hit by the metaphorical train and lost everything in one full swoop.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to those people, because I feel I was in that position too by the end of my sports betting. For me, I think the most important thing, and this is touching back on the community aspect of it, is to really have faith in the voices of those who are successfully, I guess, either in this case, moderating or altogether abstinent from the behavior. And for me, that was what pushed me. And I don't know, because I think a lot of the collecting, at least the tech in it, is more recent. So I don't know how many old timers you have that have been around a while, but just for me, having someone that I could see, this guy's been away from gambling a while, and not only that, looks like he's pretty well adjusted. I'm just going to follow what he does and follow what the literature says in GA, and not overthink. And so I think that would really be my main suggestion, is stop trying to think your way out of it.
Yeah. The reason why I ask you that, Saul, is because I think a lot of people feel a sense of intimidation. Like they suddenly hit a wall. Like we talked before about not being able to see or sense like when that line has been crossed. But for some people, it can happen in one full swoop. Like I said, whether it be a late night tilt session, or maybe they had too much to drink and they blacked out and they just threw all of their money away gambling in one night. And that can happen very, very easily. And we've seen it happen to many people. And so suddenly they're in this dilemma. They're in this situation where they don't know where to go or where to turn. And then they might feel intimidated by joining a peer support group
Oh,
because they feel like, well, I don't think I have a problem, but I just lost all this money. So what do I do? Right. So that was like sort of the theme behind that question. I think you answered it really well, but I just wanted to clarify.
oh, sure.
So
I mean, I think I guess it's difficult if someone's not ready or they don't want to go to a more structured meeting, because just in my experience, that's really been it, is having that structure, having that very specific, tangible course of action to take. And I think, I mean, this is on a similar topic, I would say, but I think there's so much time wasted with people hypothesizing about why they did it. And, I mean, it's, I think, great to acknowledge your feelings, but there's so much emotion caught up in it that I believe a lot of people lack the practical action steps to actually work on getting out of it versus just staying stuck in the thinking, which is destructive.
yeah, yeah, really well said. All right, we're going to transition over to our final segment, which is recovery awareness and creating guardrails. So you spend a lot of time educating students, families, and professionals. You're standing in rooms talking to people before they actually reach rock bottom. So what tends to resonate the most when you speak to these young people?
I think what resonates the most is just, first of all, how common it is, how it seems as though I really am not missing the mark in the audience I'm reaching, that this is very relatable content for so many of them. I think what else is shocking is the depth that some of these young people are already in. There was an article from a school paper I was reading the other day that they didn't name the students, but they said student A, B, C. One of them said, oh, he was 80 something $1,000 in the hole as a high school student. And
Sure.
I mean, I know some people come from greater wealth than others, but I mean, however you slice it, I would say that's a significant amount of money to have wagered or to be losing in high school. And so
Yeah.
I think the rapid rate at which a lot of these young adults are gambling already is the most shocking. Is that when people say, "Oh, I guess you catch them in high school when they're still doing fantasy football or whatever," it's like, no, a lot of them are past that already.
Yeah. What do you attribute that to? Is it like generational wealth? Is it because of the current nature of like things like, crypto markets and NFTs and other sort of alternative assets that have become accessible and easy for young adults to use?
Yeah, I think it's combination of things of why that's happening. I think that, being technologically savvy, having all these different ways to go about doing it online, of course, the advertising, the ease of access, the promotion of it. I think there's just so many things, and people just realized how much of a thrill gambling causes. I think people just love gambling. And now that it's been served fresh to them on, right to their doorstep, to their phone, it's never been easier to start. And so there's such a low barrier to entry that everyone seems to be doing it.
I'm also curious where you think the money is coming from, right? Like a lot of these young adults just have access to funds that I didn't have access to when I was 18 years old. So like, are they getting money from, their parents? Are they inheriting it? Are they just finding more ways to invest at a younger age, maybe taking their life savings and investing in Bitcoin or some other hot commodity? Like, what is
No,
it? Because you
yeah.
see so often these young kids, a lot of these influencers throwing around serious cash like on live streams, and it just sometimes is such a head scratcher to me. Like, how do these young people have access to such incredible amounts of money?
I mean, I would think that it's from a whole variety across the board. I mean, you have parents' money, you have kids that are maybe stealing parents' money, kids that are using their summer jobs or their savings, or you're right, maybe they hit it big and they did some sort of crypto thing and now they have all this money, or they're possibly betting on credit and they don't have any money at all. And someone who created them an account as like a bookie backed them with credit, and they started running up tabs that way. I mean, I think there's a
Yeah.
whole host of ways that happens.
Yeah, and kids are getting more and more creative, and like you
Well,
said,
that's it too. Yeah.
technologically savvy around ways that they can access funds, even if they don't necessarily have it. I mean, we see these horror stories of what is happening to young adults with like things like Robinhood, where
Oh yeah,
they're
sure.
they're investing on margin, and they're basically borrowing money from whatever provider or organization, and the next thing they know, they're in the hole millions of dollars and they have no idea what to do, right? So beyond just traditional gambling and collecting and any sort of leisurely activity that would fall into that category, there is this sort of financial irresponsibility that I think is happening across the board, especially within these young audiences, that we have to make sure they're educated. We have to make sure we're spreading awareness, and that parents also know a lot of the nuances and capabilities that exist out there, where like kids can get themselves in serious trouble if they're not paying attention.
Right. Yeah, I think the parent piece is just as important because, I mean, if you get one message as a student at school or something and you go home and the parents are clueless or they contribute to it, then you've kind of undone a lot of what was already done.
Yeah. And so from our side at Collectors MD, we're doing a lot of the same thing that you're doing in terms of education and peer support and storytelling and harm reduction. So what do you think real awareness looks like in a world flooded with dopamine-driven systems?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the messaging out there is trying to catch up with, the advertisements and things. And I guess we'll go back. I mean, my first thought was a guy like Rob, who we already mentioned earlier, of using some of these same mediums to reach people that are being reached by gambling advertising. So I think it looks like a whole host of things. It looks like being in person at community events. It looks like being in card shops or somewhere where gambling takes place. It looks like posting online, of connecting to people who are looking for content on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, things like that, to where the outreach is reaching the same channels as the gambling is. And that's what I think is also kind of difficult about groups like GA, where they're really not supposed to advertise or anything, is that the world is moving so quickly. And if you have support groups that are just sort of hidden and you have to go really digging to find them, I don't know that that's really helpful anymore.
Yeah, I agree, man. Whether it's gambling or collecting, we're not trying to shame people. We're just trying to give them clarity, because clarity restores choice and choice restores power. So before we dive into our rapid fire round, before we close things out, I did want to just mention that, before we started talking on today's episode, we had connected about a month ago, and it became pretty clear that, this isn't just about overlapping missions. It's about building something together that really helps fill a gap. And so I think there are many ways that our relationship, our partnership could come to life in practical, meaningful ways that I am excited about exploring together. And, whether that's joint talks at schools or colleges or community events where we can speak directly to young people about the realities of gambling and the rise of hobby-related harm, or working together on things like trainings for treatment staff and coalitions that help them better understand sort of this gray area between traditional gambling and compulsive collecting. I think there's a lot that we can do together. We also would love to have you join some of our weekly peer support meetings or unbox sessions, which are in partnership with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado. I think you bring a really unique perspective, and our members would be able to sort of see and understand better the parallels, the warning signs, and just feel less alone in what you're experiencing. You're one of the few people out there like myself and like Rob that are, leading the charge through lived experience. And I just think that carries a lot of weight and allows for people like us to resonate with people who are currently suffering and experiencing a lot of the same fallout and emotions that we experienced early on, and in some ways are still fighting through. We realize this is a lifelong commitment. Every single day, is an uphill battle. once you sort of cross that threshold and enter this world of recovery, it doesn't just end because you haven't gambled in a year or 2 years or however long.
Totally.
Like you're in it for the long haul. And so what the 12th step of the Gamblers Anonymous program teaches is that spreading awareness and helping your peers and other people is such an important component of recovery. And so I think you are doing an incredible job of that, Saul.
Thanks.
And I'm super grateful for your presence and for you being here. So just wanted to say that we can definitely explore and discuss ways that we can work together down the road. I'm really excited about that opportunity. So before we wrap, again, I just want to do a quick rapid fire round. So I'm going to ask you a question. You hit me with the first thing that comes to mind. You ready?
Sure.
All right. One misconception about gambling addiction you wish everyone could unlearn.
Wish people could unlearn that it's a financial problem. Say it's an emotional problem, financial consequences.
One moment in your recovery that changed everything.
Say a moment in recovery that changed everything was getting to make an amends to my grandfather, who I tried to pawn some boots he had given me. And so making an amends, even though he had passed away now, was showed me how far I'd come.
A red flag family should never ignore.
Hidden money.
What would you say to someone who insists it's just for fun?
Tricky one, because I think I need to know if they're in denial, I guess, is the context of that.
Sure.
If it's just for fun. Say, look deeper.
One message for someone trapped in the chase right now.
And get support, get help, get out of isolation.
Well done. That was the fastest rapid fire round I think we've had to date. And,
I thought you wanted me to be that. Just
no, that's exactly it. A part of it too is quite often I get wrapped up in people's answers and start adding additional context. So that's why I was going from one to the other, because if I start responding it no longer becomes a rapid fire.
Right. That was my thought process too.
It just becomes another segment. So I'm trying to refine that so that it's a little bit more I
like that. Reminds me of you must have watched Around the Horn or whatever, or pardon the interruption. I mean,
just boom, 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 boom. Okay. Awesome. Well, Saul, thank you so much for your honesty, your presence again, and the courage it takes to show up the way you do. Your work is really life-saving, and the voice you're bringing to this conversation is exactly what this movement needs. So to everyone listening, Saul's mission is clear. He's not here to judge. He's here to educate and protect. You can learn more about his work at saulmalek.com. That's SAULMALEK.com, and follow his journey across all of his platforms. And if collecting has started to feel overwhelming, compulsive, or out of control, know this: you're not broken, you're not alone, and you're not out of options. Collectors MD hosts a free weekly peer support meeting every Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up for these meetings, find tools and resources, educational content, and genuine support at collectorsmd.com. To explore more conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to Collectors MD on YouTube and all major streaming platforms. We currently host 3 podcasts: The Collector's Compass, Behind the Breaks, and Collectors MD Features, each focused on bringing greater awareness, perspective, and intention into modern collecting. Saul, thank you again for joining us. I'm Alyx Efron. This is The Collector's Compass, reminding you to collect with intention, not compulsion, and we'll see you next time.